Welcome, everyone, and thank you, Andrew. I will echo Andrew's sentiments of thanks to the entire crew here at Aeolian, all of our candidates who have joined us tonight, as well as our media panel, who I will now introduce. We have Craig Needles of The Craig Needles Show, 980 CFPL Global News Radio. Sarah Mae Chitty, who is a freelance Anishinaabe journalist and educator. And Jennifer Beeman, reporter extraordinaire from the London Free Press. As Andrew said, I'll explain a little bit about the debate format, which has been set in stone for quite some time now. We have our candidates who drew order for the order in which that they'll be answering questions throughout the evening. That will also be reversed at the end of our all candidates debate for our closing statement. So whoever spoke first during the questions, they will go last for their opening statements. Opening statements the timing of it will vary probably between minute and 30 seconds, depending on how we do through the rest of the program for timing. Depends on how feisty the debate is, so we'll see about that. Our media panel will be asking questions, and each section that we have 7, I believe, 7 different topics that we'll be going through. Most sections will have 3 questions each, so 1 from each of our panelists. Some will have 2 questions, and a couple of sections have just 1, okay? And so candidates will have 1 minute each to answer the question that they've been posed. There is an opportunity for rebuttal. Now, it's kind of at my discretion. And basically what will happen is that if a candidate in their answer directly references another candidate or another party, then that individual, should they wish to give a rebuttal, will have 30 seconds to do so, okay? Now, once that 30 seconds is up, it will not go back to the original person who took the shot, if you will, because we do have to keep moving for timing purposes. So just so everyone's on the same page, the candidates are aware of this format, and we want to make sure that our audience is as well, okay? So I think that covers the basics. We have Andrew down in front for timing. He has signs for our candidates, the 30-second, the 15-second, and also an extra little feature which we love. That's the bell of doom. And when that bell sounds, our candidates will have to finish their thought as expediently as possible, and we will move on to the next question and the next speaker, okay? I think that covers it. And to start off, we're gonna have opening statements. So each of our candidates has a minute to come up to the podium here, introduce themselves, and then we'll get going with our first round of questions. And we will begin with Michael McMullen of the People's Party of Canada.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for coming to this debate tonight. My name is Mike McMullen. I'm the federal PPC candidate for London West. I look forward to this discussion and talking about the People Party of Canada's platform. I myself never intended to become a politician, but when I heard of the People's Party, I decided it was time to look it up, and after hearing the policies, I decided to move forward and become a candidate for the party. I presently work in the IT industry, and I was involved in real estate and investing. I also served in the Canadian Armed Forces and as an operator instructor and section commander. I've worked for various multinational companies and took on various roles. The freedom to have different ideas and share opinions is a good thing. Having civilized conversations about our differences and opinions make us all better people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Liz Snellgrove of the Conservative Party.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Liz Snellgrove, and I am honored to be the Conservative candidate for West London. I'm a proud Londoner, born here, raised my family here, and for most of my career, I've spent it as a healthcare administrator. Most recently, as the executive director of a medical facility and senior home. And it's because of my dealing with seniors and helping them navigate our healthcare system, as well as our retirement and long-term care systems, that I chose to run. And I wanted to run on the Conservative ticket because the Conservative Party is committed to making life more affordable for young people, middle-aged people like myself, and seniors. I am very much looking forward to a stimulating and respectful debate with my colleagues and our Member of Parliament, and thank you.
I like that, respectful. Okay, Shauna Lukowitz of the NDP will speak next.
Hello, I'm Shauna Lukowitz. I'm the NDP candidate for London West. Thank you to the organizers and to all of you who've come out here tonight and to my fellow candidates for being here to talk about the important issues. I'm a proud Londoner as well. I grew up in this city and in London West, and it's provided the foundation of community for why I believe so strongly in the power of all of us to take better care of one another, to create a city and a country where there are good jobs, head-to-toe healthcare, sustainable, healthy environment, and affordable housing. I know it's possible. As a longtime leader with over 20 years of experience, I've demonstrated the ability to move important issues forward and change policies. I've worked in mental health, addictions, housing, and I currently teach at King's University College in Social Justice and Peace Studies. I know what issues look like on the ground and in government, and we need MPs who understand the issues we all face and who have the courage and conviction to address our most pressing problems. And I got the bell.
I'm going to make a prediction. The bell featured prominently the other two nights we've done this. I think tonight will be no different, and that's okay. I'd like to welcome now Marianne Hodge of the Green Party up.
Bonjour, good evening. We live in changing times. Changing times call for engaged leaders who are ethical and live their values. I grew up on a small farm with one parent on disability. After the death of my first husband, I learned the struggles of being a single parent. And as a foster parent, I have seen the struggles of poverty and addictions. Whether it is environmental protection, greater action on climate change, or real reconciliation, when something needs doing, I can be counted on to get the job done. I support the Thames Talbot Land Trust and Reforest London. My house has solar panels and a pollinator garden. I instigated the call for London to declare a climate emergency. I helped found the Environmental Stewardship Coalition and helped organize last week's climate march. As board chair for a children's summer camp, I created a week of First Nations culture to respond to the 94 calls to action in the Truth and Reconciliation report. We need leaders who put their communities first, who are ready to work across the aisle with all parties to address the pressing challenges of the climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, I'd like to welcome up Kate Young of the Liberal Party.
Thank you so much, Jess, and good evening, and thank you for this invitation. I'm Kate Young, and I'm the Liberal candidate in London West, the riding that I raised my family in and I live in now. I have been honored the past 4 years to represent the people of London West in Ottawa and represent the good work that the Liberal Party is doing for the benefit of all Canadians. We believe that a strong economy starts with a strong middle class, and that's why one of the first things we did as a government was to raise taxes on the wealthiest Canadians and cut taxes for the middle class. And we also introduced the Canada Child Benefit to help families with the high cost of raising their children. Our plan is working. In the past 4 years, Canadians have created more than 1 million jobs, most of them full-time. Canada now has the best balance sheet in the G7, and together we've lifted 900 people out of poverty. We know more needs to be done, and I'm prepared to do the hard work to get it done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next, we would like to welcome Jacques Boudreau, our Libertarian candidate.
Good evening, everyone. So yes, I'm the Libertarian candidate. I am an actuary by trade. I am essentially running because I'm very concerned about the size of promises that we've made that we cannot pay for. That's what I do in my business, where in the private sector we have to fund promises that we make Unfortunately, in the political world, it doesn't have to be the case, which means that we're going to have significant problem. I would like also to add that I'm often asked, what is the Libertarian Party? Very simple. We are founded on the non-aggression principle, also known as the NAP, and it simply says that the initiation or the threat of initiation of force against the innocent is always wrong. Unfortunately, one of the largest purveyor of threat of violence against citizens is the government. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bring this back down. Jacques, you're very tall. Okay, we're all set up here. We got our notes. Everyone's back in their spaces. This is good. Everyone ready? Yes. Thank you for your enthusiasm. Okay, so now time to hand it over to our media panel. We have our first section of the night, which is the environment and climate change. So we have three questions in this section. We will begin with Craig Needles, and our first candidate to answer will be Michael McMullen of the PPC.
Canada is on pace or not on pace to hit its targets from the Paris Climate Accord, depending on who you talk to and when you talk to them. Do you believe that we need to cut our emissions by 30% from 2005 levels, which is our agreement in the Paris Accord, or do you think we do not need to hold up our end of that agreement?
Well, given the uncertainties over the scientific basis of global warming and the certainties and the huge costs and measures designed to fit it, there's no compelling reason to jeopardize our prosperity with more government interventions. At the People's Party, we will withdraw from the Paris Accord and abandon unrealistic greenhouse gas emission targets. We'll focus on innovation and other strategies to migrate the climate problem. Canada itself is one of the greenest countries in the world, and if you include all the forests and the trees in this country, we actually have like a negative climate footprint. We should be punishing the polluters, the countries that punish or that pollute the most, and rewarding countries that don't.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, Liz Snellgrove of the Conservative Party.
Yes, I do believe that we need to reach that target, but it's how we're going to do it. The current carbon tax is not an environmental plan, it's a revenue plan. Under the Conservative plan, we'll focus on the highest emitters. It should not be the responsibility of, we should not tax individuals. Individuals should make their own decisions to contribute to climate change, but we need to focus on the high emitters and then focus, as Michael said also, on innovation. If we focus on innovation, and that's something that we can export to other countries who truly are high emitters, overall, Canada has a negligible impact. It's not to say that we don't have to focus on what we're doing here, but if we focus on innovation and export that, I think that could be sustainable.
Thank you very much. Next, Shauna Lukowitz of the NDP.
Okay, so like many of you here, I recently attended the climate strikes led by students within our community, and they are sending a clear message to governments and to all of us that our governments are failing and that they will hold them accountable. The NDP believes that we should set science-based greenhouse gas emission targets that are in line with the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And so we will immediately declare a climate emergency. We will put forward those science-based greenhouse gas emission targets. We will put an end to fossil fuel subsidies and instead invest in green infrastructure and economies. We will create 300,000 good green jobs across the country. And as New Democrats, we know that it's not just about climate change, that we need to be ensuring that we are including a just transition for communities and workers. And so that is also part of our plan.
Thank you very much. Marianne Hodge now of the Green Party.
As I already mentioned, I was responsible for the City of London to declare a climate emergency, and so we definitely, the Green Party advocates for meeting our agreements in the Paris Accord. And although Canada is a small emitter compared to some of the other countries, every little bit makes a difference. It's the old saying that It only takes a small group of committed individuals to make a big difference. It only takes a small group of committed countries to make a difference. And we see that with the impact that Greta Thunberg has had on the enthusiasm that people have shown. And it's like a groundswell that people have taken this opportunity to indicate that they are on track, that they want to make these cuts. And if we all come together, all the small countries, we can make the same difference that China would make if they hit the targets. So being small does not stop us from being a big part of the solution.
Thank you very much. Kate Young of the Liberals now.
Thank you, Jess. This is the #1 issue at the doors when I go door knocking. I think if you contrast that to 4 years ago, hardly anyone at the doors talked about the environment. Now everyone is. It doesn't matter how old the person is, they're talking about it. And we know from the climate strike last week that young people are so concerned. The Liberal government believes the environment and the economy go hand in hand, and we have short, medium, and long-term goals, and that's what you need. You need a goal that is tangible too, that isn't pie in the sky. We have to work together to make sure that we have a clean economy and a clean environment, and a clean economy for that matter. But it's important that we work with other levels of government and that we work together to find answers, because we are putting a price on pollution. We are investing in infrastructure, clean infrastructure, and we are investing in clean energy for the long term. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Jacques Boudreau, our Libertarian candidate.
Okay, thank you. I have spent hundreds of hours studying this issue, and my short answer is, at this point, I don't know. Let me expand a little bit. The climate is what's referred to as a nonlinear chaotic system, which means that we have to deal with hundreds of variables and interaction between these variables that amount in the thousands, possibly in the millions. The more I study it, the more I'm in awe of the complexity, such that when I hear comments that are essentially treating this as a linear, non-chaotic system, I think it's complete rubbish. People ought to be a lot more exhibiting more humility in dealing with this issue, because to think that this is going to happen that way or this way with 100% certainty is just foolish.
Okay. Thank you very much. Moving on to our second question from Sarah May Chitty, and the first to respond will be Liz Snellgrove of the Conservatives.
So for context, biodiversity is declining, not just in Canada, across the world. Recently, a study was published by UBC that concluded the percentage of biodiversity of land managed by Indigenous peoples exceeds that of even federally managed government parks. So I was just wondering how you intend to work with Indigenous communities to protect the land and facilitate Indigenous stewardship beyond just reservations.
No question that Indigenous peoples are the stewards of the land, and they are taking the leadership in this area. And a Conservative government would work collaboratively with the various communities and learn from them. They truly are leaders and innovators in this area, and a Conservative government would work hand in hand to learn from them.
Thank you very much. Shauna Lukowitz of the NDP.
So as New Democrats, in our climate action plan, woven throughout and included is a commitment to working hand in hand with Indigenous communities as we address climate action. And what that would look like is, a full and equal partnership, recognizing that Indigenous peoples are on the front lines every day dealing with the impacts of climate change, but also, as you said, have the traditional cultural and experience knowledge to know, to be best positioned to know how to address not only decreasing biodiversity, but just the impacts of climate change. And so the NDP is fully committed to working hand in hand in full partnership with Indigenous communities.
Thank you very much. Marianne Hodge of the Green Party.
Biodiversity is absolutely a concern with the Green Party, and it is something that goes hand in hand with the climate crisis, that as we see the devastation that the climate crisis is going to impose, it is non-discriminating and it will affect everyone. And it's a all hands on deck approach, and the wisdom and the knowledge that goes back thousands of years that the Indigenous peoples can bring to the table will be a key component in finding solutions to protect biodiversity and our natural environments, because it is key to the mental health of all Canadians to ensure that we do have a protected environment. And one of the issues that often does not get addressed is the water quality on First Nations lands that really is an offshoot of these discussions about biodiversity and the devastation that has happened on their lands.
Thank you very much. Kate Young now of the Liberals.
The boil water advisories on the many reserves are just tragic. We shouldn't have them. And when we came into office, there were 87, and now we're down. We've cut 87, and now we're down to about 52. And we're going in the right direction. But no one on any reserve in Canada should not be able to drink or bathe or wash their clothes in the water. And we know that has to end, and we have a goal to end drinking water advisories on reserves by 2021. And that's a first step. I know that the environment, our Indigenous people were the first people, of course, here, and we learn from you. And certainly that's what we have to do, is listen. We can't be the ones to tell you how to move forward. We have to listen to you about how you want to make a better world for all.
Thank you very much. And we go to Jacques Boudreau of the Libertarian Party.
Okay, before I answer your question, I just want to mention the urgency or emergency has been mentioned twice tonight already. I want to quote here Petteri Talas, the Secretary General of the World the WMO, that's the science branch of the IPCC. He happens to be the top scientist at the UN, and he said that the alarmist narrative on climate change has gone off the rails, and criticized them for provoking unjustified anxiety. Anyway, to answer your question, we firmly believe in the tort system. That is, if you own land or property and somebody does something that harms it, you ought to be able to sue. Once upon a time, about 100 years ago, that worked really well until the government actually made it more difficult for people to protect their private rights.
And now Michael McMullen of the PPC.
Oh, hi. The Aboriginal population of Canada is extremely diversified. It accounts for about 5% of Canada's population and compromises First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. Many don't have the basic services that we all take for granted, such as access to clean water. There are also major issues to address regarding treaty negotiations, housing, property rights on reserves. Many injustices were committed in the past by the Canadian government towards Aboriginals. We cannot rewrite the past, but we can only seek best way to live together for a harmonious future for everyone. The People's Party of Canada's government will respect our Constitution and our treaties, promote and establish individual private property rights on reserves as to empower its residents and give them increased control over their lives. We do not believe there is a climate emergency, and I also believe that it's bad for the federal government to try to push such a thing.
Thank you very much. We go to our third. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there was no direct mention of a party or a candidate. Sorry. So our third question is coming from Jennifer Beeman now of the Free Press, and Shauna Lukowitz of the NDP will be the first to respond.
The Great Lakes are a precious resource and a shared one. Algae blooms, invasive species, Asian carp. We rely on the U.S. to monitor and to track and to address these issues, including our own efforts, certainly, but it's definitely a shared responsibility. How will your government work with the U.S. administration, Republican or Democrat, to protect the Great Lakes?
Well, for anyone who lives in London, we're well aware of the importance of the Great Lakes, not only as a beautiful place to visit, but just in terms of our economy and the diversity that it creates environmentally for us. So in terms of working with the U.S. on our waterways, the NDP has a plan to protect our Great Lakes and our waterways, and to re-implement acts related to that. In terms of working with the U.S., the NDP will do our best to negotiate with whatever government is there, but we know that the U.S., just like us, wants to protect the Great Lakes, that we all rely on it for drinking water, for navigation, as well as recreation, tourism, and pleasure. So it's about finding those common interests and finding that common ground and working together in both of our best interests.
Thank you very much. And now Marianne Hodge of the Green Party.
This is certainly a concern that was brought forward at the Water Summit on this past weekend, that it is imperative that water is protected, especially a shared resource. But I did want to refute the positions of a couple of the people here that we are not in a climate emergency. And we have IPCC scientists, thousands of them. We have bankers, 34 of the central bankers around the world, including the central banker of China, economists, including professors of economy at Stanford and Berkeley, who all agree that we are in the midst of a climate crisis. Even CEOs, like the CEO of Shell, have indicated that we need to move to a fossil fuel-free economy. So we can look at the climate crisis and not see that this is something that can cost us $550 trillion, or we can look at it as an economic opportunity.
Thank you very much. And I'll just take this brief moment to remind everyone to just check their phone and make sure it's on silent. Just real quick. I'm checking mine too. It's on silent. Great. Kate Young of the Liberals, please.
Thank you very much. The Great Lakes are the most wonderful resource that we have, and it's something that we do have meetings ongoing with representatives from all of the states around the Great Lakes, and it's provincial and federal, state and the federal government, and this is ongoing because we know how important it is, and it's something that I think all of us over the years have seen how Lake Huron, when we go to Lake Huron to go camping, we can see, and I remember over the years how it started to get really bad, and to the point where I was afraid to go into Lake Huron, and Lake Erie was always a struggle. And so we know that we have to do more, but it is in the best interests of both countries to make sure that we do keep the Great Lakes clean. We have to do more. We know that the algae is a problem. There are many problems, but there are discussions ongoing all the time.
Thank you very much. And Jacques Boudreau of the Libertarian Party.
Going back to my previous point about the tort system, if we reopened the Constitution in this country and protected private property rights, which we currently don't have, people adjacent to the lake could sue anyone who's polluting it, as an example. Again, 100 years ago, this resulted in many, many improvements without any laws having to be passed. Simply give people the right or the opportunity to sue people who damage the environment, and again, based on the experience of 100 years ago, things would get much better, much faster. And in terms of dealing with the U.S., I can only hope that I would be able to convince them to also allow private property rights to be respected.
Thank you very much. Now to Michael McMullen of the People's Party of Canada.
Unfortunately, we have seen, especially with the federal government, one diplomatic failure after the next, from China to India to the United States. We need to work better to be more diplomatic and to push our values around the world, to push our innovation and to push our beliefs around. In our government, we would work closely and we would focus on building relationships, not destroying them. Regardless of what the administration is in the U.S., whether it be Donald Trump or whoever wins the 2020 election. Focusing on these relationships will help us be both of our countries be very prosperous and be able to deal with the water problem. Implementing practical solutions to make Canada's air, water, soil cleaner, including bringing clean drinking water to remote First Nation communities, is one of our priorities.
Thank you very much. And now we'll have a 30-second rebuttal from Kate Young of the Liberals.
I want to make mention of the fact that it is difficult to negotiate with Donald Trump, and I think we have done an excellent job of trying to negotiate with the President of the United States and to actually be able to come up with a new NAFTA deal. I am so pleased that we have been able to come to an agreement on that, and that tells you that we can negotiate with the United States, and we're doing it very well.
Thank you very much. And now Liz Snellgrove of the Conservatives.
We certainly do have to preserve and protect the incredible resource that the Great Lakes offer. A Conservative government under Andrew Scheer would negotiate with Donald Trump, but as well as the governors in the states that border the Great Lakes, because they too, their citizens also want to protect and have a clean water source. This is an example of pollution and climate change that does not recognize borders. And so a Conservative government will reach out to those states and those governors that border the Great Lakes.
Thank you very much. Okay, so that is our first round of questions. Look at that, went so smoothly, knock on wood. I don't want to jinx anything. Now on to the economy.
Wait for it.
And that will be, the first question I believe is going to be asked by Craig Needles, and our first responding candidate will be Marianne Hodge of the Green Party.
Consistently, when we see the employment surveys from Stats Canada, London is at or very close to the bottom when it comes to workforce participation rate. Most of the summer, we were somewhere in the 57% range. Recently, we've been at 58, but still at the very bottom of the table nationwide. How did London get to this point, and what should we do about it?
I can't say that I have all the answers to how we got here, but one way that we can get out is to have a look at future technologies and how we can support those industries that are coming out of our universities and our colleges. So we are lucky here in London to have a great resource. One example being Robarts as being a spin-off from the university research that has become an international organization and does very well. We need to encourage those things from our research arms of our universities and have a dedicated a push for green technologies, because that is the focus of the future, and the Green Party would support initiatives to help people to make their homes more efficient, and that would provide thousands of construction jobs.
Thank you very much. Our next response now from Kate Young of the Liberals.
I think it's obvious that the fall of the manufacturing sector really did impact London very much. We had so many plants that closed. Kellogg's, which was near here, was just one. It is a changing economy, and we have to make sure that we're there for the people now. And innovation is so important, and certainly we are doing some amazing things in London, and I'm up at Western quite often talking with scientists about all the exciting research that is going on, and we know that London has a new economy with the IT, and we know that there are ways to increase what we're doing here with help from the government and making sure that we have a future that is strong as far as skilled trades, and we need Fanshawe and Western to work together to make sure that we're training people for the new economy.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Jacques Boudreau of the Libertarian Party.
Well, the first thing I would say is that we have to be careful here. If you have a whole bunch of cities, one is bound to be at the bottom, and the reasons could be many. It could be demographics. It could be that you have more retired people than somewhere else, or you could have a number of very young people because they're attending university or Fanshawe. So I would be careful to jump to conclusion that there's something nefarious going on in London. I would make a general comment about labor participation rate. There is no doubt that governments are making it ever more expensive for employers to employ people. And that puts a natural brake on the ability of people to get jobs.
Okay, thank you very much. Now to Michael McMullen of the PPC.
I agree with Kate. Tens of thousands of manufacturing jobs have left London. Many of these jobs are replaced with low-paying part-time jobs. And people just don't have enough money to get by. Every year, things just keep getting harder and harder for Canadians, from skyrocketing food costs, transportation costs, utility costs, and ridiculous government tax schemes, while at the same time our economy doesn't even grow. Canadians are taxed on average 42.5%, which doesn't include the taxes you pay for the goods and services you receive. In many cases, you pay a tax on a tax on a tax. And this happens again and again and again. Putting an end to crony capitalism and corporate welfare, I believe, is actually be easier to convince Canadians to accept our pro-Canadian policies. We will also create a three-tier tax system, simplifying the taxes for all Canadians. We'll also abolish the capital gains tax. So if you have savings or investments, you can actually make money off of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Liz Snellgrove of the Conservatives.
Actually, Jock, I think that it's been a trend that this low unemployment has started really in 2003 and has continued. So we haven't been able to get beyond it. And again, we've talked about manufacturing jobs leaving London. London should be a healthcare hub. With Fanshawe, with the university, with Lawson Research, with our world-class medical systems, that is a service that all Canadians, especially aging Canadians, need. And we need to maximize our ability, our innovation to grow that sector in London and to get us out of this stubborn unemployment issue.
Shauna Lukowitz of the NDP.
So the economy is there to work for all of us. It's supposed to provide good, stable jobs that allow us to provide for the things that we need and our families need. Unfortunately, that's less and less the case. People are finding it harder to afford the things they need, and we know that the gap between those at the very top and the rest of us is growing. In addition to our low labor participation rate, London has one of the highest poverty rates at 15.2% compared to the national average of 9.5%. We have a housing crisis. We have an addiction crisis. All of this is connected. As New Democrats, we know that investing in strong public services is good for people and it's good for business. That's why we will invest in things like childcare, pharmacare, education. London has not attracted the jobs like healthcare, education, and the things that we are known for that comparable sized cities have.
Thank you very much. Our second question on the economy will come from Sarah May Chitty, and our first candidate to reply will be Kate Young of the Liberals.
It's funny, Kate, because earlier you said that land is tied to economy, so my question kind of pertains to that. So earlier this year, Romeo Saganasch's bill, C-262, to align Canadian law with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, died on the floor. Most notably, it was the Conservative Party that argued that the stipulations of free and prior informed consent would interfere with particularly economic development. So can you speak, each of you, to how your party will approach free and prior informed consent and UNDRIP going forward?
Thank you very much for that question, and certainly we are in favor of UNDRIP and making sure that we realize the United Nations and respect the wishes of the Indigenous people in Canada. If I can say that, I had a chance to read over the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women report, and if anyone hasn't had a chance to read it, it really is amazing. When you start to read it, you realize how disastrous the Canadian government was to the Indigenous people, and we cannot go back. We have to move forward together, but we have to take the lead from Indigenous Canadians. It is heartbreaking to see and to hear the stories that we've heard over the last couple of years, and it's so good to know that Canadians are starting to wake up to realize that we have to make amends and that we have to make a difference now.
Thank you very much. Jacques Boudreau of the Libertarians.
Well, we think that the Indigenous people have suffered enough under the guidance of the federal government, and we would repeal the Indian Act immediately and grant bands the opportunity to negotiate with the government one-on-one to decide what type of participation they want in the Confederation, with full authority over their private property rights and mineral and resources as well, and for them to finally be free to handle their affairs on their own term.
Michael McMullen of the PPC.
We keep hearing about how bad the homeless problem is and how bad the jobs are in London and how bad everything else is. While the federal government spends $72 billion, has increased the debt by $72 billion. They inherited a balanced budget, and now we're up another $72 billion. Today we pay $1 billion a day just to service the national debt. Our national debt has reached $700 billion. We think it's important that we balance the budget and reduce the national debt, put more money back into the pockets of Canadians, restore fiscal responsibility to the government is imperative, and it's time we start rewarding the taxpayer. Apparently we have all kinds of money to throw around the world for every little cause, but we can't even take care of our own people. That's a problem.
And we will go to Kate Young for a very quick 30-second rebuttal.
Well, I just wanted to say that that when you look at the debt to GDP ratio, we have the best in the G7 countries, and we are doing very well. And at this point, it is not the time to be slashing. And that is something that we know that Canadians don't want. We see it with the Doug Ford government in Ontario. It can't happen federally. So we must be careful when we talk about cutting our deficit.
Thank you very much. Now we go to Liz Snellgrove of the Conservatives.
Right. So, and I can't respond. I didn't mean to drop the mic.
Is the mic, is it functioning properly? I just want to make sure it's loud enough for everyone to hear.
Thanks. That's partnership working together. I'd love to talk about the economy and the last 4 years and slashing, but I won't. I'll go back to the UNDRIP. Canada is one of the few countries in the world where Indigenous rights are recognized and entrenched in our Constitution. My understanding from the NDP bill was that there were some technical issues in giving one community a veto over others. And I'd just also like to point out that even though the bill was passed by the Liberals, it died, I believe, in the Senate by Liberal senators.
No.
Okay, well, that'll be a 30-second rebuttal for Kate.
No, it was the Conservative senators that stopped it from getting back to the House.
Okay, and now we move on to Shauna Lukowitz, the NDP, for her reply to this question.
Yes. Well, so New Democrats under Romeo Saganash have been working very hard to see UNDRIP make it through Parliament and the Senate. And so we have fully committed to implementing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. We know that it is imperative to move beyond consultation with Indigenous people, and that free and prior informed consent is the standard that we need to be using moving forward. And we are committed, regardless of forming the government, being in opposition, or just having a few MPs there, to keep pushing and making sure that it happens.
And Marianne Hodge of the Green Party.
A Green government will respect Indigenous sovereignty over self-defined and self-governed lands, whether First Nations, Métis, or Inuit, and will respect all rights that their title to land entails, including the right to sovereignty. We are committed to UNDRIP, including provisions for free, prior, and informed consent on all matters impacting Indigenous peoples. And the Green Party of Canada also supports the Spirit Bear call for Canada to immediately comply with all rulings by the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, ordering it to immediately cease its discriminatory funding of First Nations, child and family services, and fully and properly implement Jordan's principles. And also, perhaps equally important, is to train all public servants, including those at the senior level, to receive mandatory training to identify and address government ideology, policies, and practices that fetter the implementation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action.
Thank you very much. And we go to our third question in the economy file, which is from Jennifer Beeman. And our first to respond will be Jacques Boudreau of the Libertarian Party.
Automotive manufacturing jobs, both vehicles and parts, are hugely important to southwestern Ontario, not just London, but around the region. But there are pressures on this sector, everything from the cost of doing business to other regulations that affect their bottom line. There are fixes, of course. There are subsidies and changes to regulations that can make things a little bit easier on these companies. I want to know what you think the role of government is in all this.
Well, the common fallacy is that the government somehow is supposed to direct. If people want to know how well that works, they can go back to the Soviet Union. Central planning does not work. The only thing the government can do is get out of the way. Certainly subsidies are not a solution. We advocate complete abolition of corporate taxes. There's a number of rules and regulations that make it difficult to operate. Those would have to be parsed. I mean, Ontario alone has a staggering 380,000 regulations. And apparently that's not enough because there's more coming. So reduce the corporate taxes, stop the subsidies, make it easier, reduce bureaucracy and red tape. I mean, goodness, we know we have so much of that. And you know, if you go back to 125 years ago, we had the best growth rates ever with a government that was almost non-existent.
Thank you very much. Now, Michael McMullen of the PPC.
Yeah, ending, one of the things we're going to do is most of these companies are big companies. I mean, you've got, GM, Bombardier, all these other companies. What we're going to do is we're just, these companies make a lot of money, and we don't understand why we have to pay them corporate welfare. So we're talking about fiscal responsibility and then bringing back accountability to the government. So ending corporate welfare and crony capitalism, cut reckless spending, creating more jobs, and creating more wealth for Canadians. Taxpayers should not have to pay this type of money to these companies. We need to grow our economy, and we need to make sure that we put Canadians first.
Thank you very much. Liz Snellgrove of the Conservatives.
let's focus on innovation. So there are electric vehicles. So let's help those corporations retool. But as a conservative government would reduce the red tape that our current government has put on small and large businesses, which makes the cost of doing business exorbitant. So let's let businesses innovate, invest in capital, create jobs, create high-paying jobs that contribute to the tax base, and I think that's the best way that we can stimulate this economy.
Shauna Lukowitz of the NDP.
Anyone who lives in London or region has been impacted by the automotive industry and the closing of plants across the province and across Canada. Many auto workers feel abandoned by the government, whether it be because of GM or earlier Ford in our own community. The NDP would bring in a Made in Canada automotive strategy that would be in line with our move towards zero-emission vehicles. We would work with the province, municipalities, and territories to convene an auto summit to look at what exactly a Made in Canada auto strategy would look like, and then we would work towards a Made in Canada strategy for zero-emission vehicles.
Thank you very much. Marianne Hodge of the Green Party.
It is the government's role to incentivize companies to move in a direction that the country decides is important. And the climate crisis is one of those issues that the government needs to step in and make it a priority. Even the CEO of Shell has put it in writing that we need to move to a fossil fuel-free economy. And he is waiting for governments to incentivize them to act on that. It also was apparent when we had the microfit program and the incentives in order to add solar panels. There were many solar companies to choose from. Today, there's barely any. So when you incentivize things, you get more production. And in this green economy, we have lots of trained workers in the London area who can be an active part of that green economy and have good green jobs here in London.
Thank you very much. I like to leave a little pause for the applause because I know you're a very active audience that way. Don't want to talk over it. Kate Young of the Liberals, please.
Thank you, Jess. I had the distinct pleasure of being parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Transport in the first part of our mandate. And at that time, we were starting to just have discussions with the major car manufacturers about autonomous vehicles. And that's just 4 years ago. And it was amazing how quickly things have progressed. And we know in London that we can be a part of this solution because the auto parts base in London is very strong, and we know that a number of people that live in London West work at the Ingersoll plant and work in the auto parts manufacturing in this economy, and we have to keep it strong, but we have to look to the future, and we have to look to electric vehicles and find ways to make sure that the government is offering incentives to these companies to make sure that we're looking to the future.
Thank you very much. All right, we're into our third topic, which is infrastructure spending. Yes. And this section has 2 questions, and the first will come from Craig Needles, and our first to respond will be Michael McMullen of the PPC.
Affordable housing is seen as a provincial or municipal issue, but at some point, I think there's got to be a 3-level of government solution to the fact that we've got $400 million hole when it comes to repairs for affordable housing in this community. How would you tackle that as an MP, and how would your party tackle this? Because it's a problem all over the country.
And that's why we've got one of the best tax plans, pretty much of all the parties, to incentives to lower taxes for all Canadians. So one of our tax plans is if you make between $15,000 and $100,000, you will pay 15% tax, which is about an 8% reduction. Also, by reducing the capital gains tax, or actually eliminating the capital gains tax, that means that you'll be able to save and grow your investments as well. Making housing more affordable and dealing with affordable housing is a big issue. This morning I was at the real estate debate talking about some of these issues with them, and it's one of the things that I'd like to prioritize on and try to get some affordable housing here. The other thing we like to do is we want to claw back some of this money that we're giving in foreign aid and then use that to put Canadians in front of the line.
Okay, Liz Snellgrove of the Conservatives.
A Conservative government will change the formula of the stress test to allow first-time home buyers to get into the market. We do have a terrible issue with affordable housing in London, and that's because there's no rentals. Individuals who can't afford that first mortgage are taking up the rentals. In addition to that, we will remove the stress test completely from mortgage renewals so that subsequent home buyers can find the products that are best for them. We'll extend the amortization rate to 30 years. So those are policies that we can put in place that will expand the inventory for new homes, but allow those people who are still renting to save for their first home.
Thank you very much. Shauna Lukowitz of the NDP.
So there's many faces of the housing crisis here in London. I think of a family that I met about a month ago who live in Northwest London, family of 4. They live in what would have been an affordable townhome, and their rents have risen and they have to move out. I think of the young people I know who are part of middle-class families who are living with their parents because they cannot afford to rent an apartment, never mind a home. And then, of course, there's a very visible state of homelessness that we see on our streets. And so our housing crisis is large. Our social housing waiting list has grown by over 70% in the last 2 years, and our vacancy rate has shrunk to just 2%. So it is an issue. It is one of the issues reasons that I'm running. The NDP will build 500,000 affordable housing units across the country to address the capital and infrastructure gap in current social housing. As part of our climate action plan, we will be retrofitting all social housing building and federal public buildings as the first stage of our retrofitting process.
Thank you. Marianne Hodge of the Green Party.
The Green Party recognizes that only 10 cents out of every tax dollar flows to municipalities, and that is where the rubber hits the road in terms of housing, and especially affordable housing. And we also have to make that distinction between housing that's affordable versus low-income housing. And I would object that Canada actually has the highest ratio of home ownership in most of the developing world. And it's not a question of not having enough homes or making them affordable, but that it's in our low-income housing that we are really struggling. We see that with homelessness, and the Green Party would move money from the federal budgets to municipalities in order that they may close that gap, because the governments have stopped investing in rental housing, but the Green Party would allocate 1% of the GST to municipalities for housing.
Thank you very much. And we'll go to Kate Young of the Liberals.
Well, as of March 2018, we have helped more than 1 million Canadians find places to call home through new builds, repairs, renovations, and rental subsidies. So we're on the right track. We created Canada's first ever national housing strategy. It's a 10-year, $55 billion plan that will strengthen the middle class, and it fuels our economy and gives more Canadians across the country a place to call home. And we're aiming to not only reduce chronic homelessness by 50%, but also create up to 125,000 new housing units and repair 300,000 existing units and remove 530,000 households from housing need so that families don't have to choose between a place to call home and groceries, which is happening now. We are working to make housing more affordable here in London and across Canada.
Okay. So what I'll say is we're just going to nip audience comments such as that in the bud. We're just going to respect all of the candidates that are up here as they answer questions. And if you have comments to make later, I would suggest that you respectfully approach candidates after the debate. Thank you, Kate. Jacques Boudreau, your answer, please, to the question.
Okay, so first of all, when I hear solutions, which is that we are going to enable people to increase their demand for housing without addressing the supply, I mean, that's just plain economic illiteracy. I mean, if you allow more people to bid up a limited number of supply, you're just going to have the price go up, and you'll be back at square one. Every time I hear that something has become unaffordable and I dig deep enough, I find out that the government is responsible. There's all kinds of zoning bylaws, there's all kinds of restrictions. What we need is to increase the supply, not to, again, bid up the prices. Now, one of the things that we would do is to audit the Bank of Canada and investigate the role that it plays in inflation, which bids up prices as well, which is a direct contributor to making it more difficult for people to afford housing or other things.
Okay. Thank you very much. Our next question will come from Jennifer Beeman, and our first candidate to answer will be Liz Snellgrove of the Conservatives.
Any federal infrastructure investments likely going to involve provincial governments that may or may not agree with your philosophy or political values or priorities? During the campaign, there's been plenty of pot shots levied on both sides against the unpopular record of Ontario Premier Kathleen Wynne and the controversial changes Doug Ford is making. How will your government bridge those differences between provincial parties and yourselves?
Well, a Conservative government will work extremely well with the provinces. There are more now than 4 years ago who are led by a Conservative government. And most importantly, with the municipalities, because when we're talking about local infrastructure needs, whether it be transportation or housing, it's really the people in the cities and at the municipalities who know best how to spend those dollars. The federal government, under Andrew Scheer, would work collaboratively with levels of government at the province and at the municipal level.
Thank you very much. Shauna Lukowitz of the NDP.
As New Democrats, we would work with all parties, all provinces, regardless of who's ever leading them. We know that, elections come and go and governments come and go, and that we need to be able to work across difference. Jagmeet Singh was an MPP before he became the leader of our party. He knows provincial issues. He knows how they work. And so he is well positioned to be able to work with any premier across the country in order to address infrastructure issues, healthcare issues, all the different things that we're going to need to work with the provinces on, as well as municipalities. Working across difference, even just as an MP, it's something that I've done a lot of in the community, and it is one of my strengths to be able to work across with people I disagree with people who hold different political values and different priorities. So,
Thank you very much. Marianne Hodge of the Green Party.
The Green Party are consensus builders. As a party who has not had a place at the seat, we know how to create influence and to bring people together to talk about shared values that we can come to agreement on the important issues. What the Green Party of Canada would do is create a Council of Canadian Governments. And this would be working with the provinces and the municipalities to bring everyone together, because it's a global world these days. Decisions affect multiple layers of governments, and to have everyone on the table at the same time stops those issues from unilaterally being passed down from one government level to another. And it also ensures that decisions are made in a consensual basis so that we don't have the big swings when different parties take over.
Thank you very much. And yeah. I was waiting for you. And Kate Young of the Liberals.
Well, it does give me pause to think for a moment what it would be like with a federal Conservative government and a provincial Conservative government. We have seen what the provincial Conservative government has done to this province in just over a year, and we can't let that happen federally as well. Now, we do know we have to work with all of the provinces, and that is what we have been able to do as far as the infrastructure dollars for London. I was very pleased to see that that we were able to come to the table with the money that is London's fair share, which was from the federal government, $123 million. But it didn't come without worrying of what the province would do. And I was so happy that they did decide to come to the table with their portion of the money for London's infrastructure plans. When we know that it's about transit, it's not the BRT that we originally talked, but the 10 projects that we are funding.
And we will go to Liz Snellgrove of the Conservatives for a 30-second rebuttal.
Well, Kate, I'll tell you what gives me pause. And that is knowing that the architects behind Kathleen Wynne and Dalton McKenty's governments over 14 years are now working at the federal level. And I certainly would not want to see another 4 years of Liberal government resulting in what we ended up after 14 years of Liberal gross misspending in this province.
And we will go to Jacques Boudreau of the Libertarian Party.
Oh yeah, I mean, these were sunny days under Wynne. Anyway, co-ownership or co-responsibilities for infrastructure does not work. It just leads to finger pointing, and it's one of the easiest tricks in the world that you depend on somebody for funding, and then you're supposed to do it, and then they didn't provide me the funding, and they didn't do it. The least bad governments are local governments, and to the extent that municipalities are responsible for infrastructure, then we ought to transfer tax points to them so they can handle their own business. This idea that London has to go begging to the provincial government or federal government to get funding to do different things is ridiculous, and it has to stop. We need to transfer points, tax points, to the people who are responsible for delivering the services.
Thank you very much. And to Michael McMullen of the PPC.
Yeah, we just talked about the national debt being up above $700 billion. And again, we pay $1 billion a day just to service that debt. I think offering to build 500,000 homes, I'd like to know where that money's coming from. Also, building relationships within government is what being a politician is all about. So as a federal leader, I will make sure that that relationship is there, and then I'll make sure that the interests of Londoners come first. Even if that requires some sort of intervention at a federal level, provincially. But federally, it's up to the federal government to transfer the money. The provincial government costs how much money they need, and then the transfer payments are made. And we're going to have a lot more money if we're elected, and these transfer payments are going to grow, which means healthcare, transit, schools, everything is going to benefit.
So just to reset a little bit, and I realized that I failed to mention that this evening, this All Candidates debate, as our previous two nights, have been filmed by the crew from Rogers. They are not airing live, they are pre-taped. They will start airing in heavy rotation, as the term has been put out there, as of the 6th, which is Sunday. And so they'll air all the way up to the election on the 21st. So if you weren't able to come out to our first two debates this this week, but you're really interested in finding out how they went and how everyone answered, you can start tuning into Rogers Cable 13 here in London, and you can check out the footage of those debates. Also, a quick update for our candidates. We are running a little bit over time. This is why I'm going to try and talk really fast. So we have just snipped out one section of questions at the very end. It was only a one-question section, so that will now be null and void, and we have 3 sections remaining. Healthcare, which is next, that has 3 questions, and we'll go from there. Okay? All right, and just as a refresher again, all the candidates have 1 minute to answer the questions from the panel, and if there is a direct reference to a candidate or a party, they will have 30-second rebuttal. After that rebuttal, it does not go back to the person who put the shot across the bow. We move forward, okay? Just so we're all clear. All right. Okay. I feel like we should ring the bell just to start it, but then, oh, yes. Yeah. Okay, so here we go. We are starting with healthcare. Our first question will come from Craig Needles, and Shauna Lukowitz of the NDP is our first to respond.
We've heard a lot of promises from, I believe, all the leaders about changes to the number of dollars that come from the federal government to the province in the healthcare transfers agreement. Now, here in Ontario, I don't have to tell any of you, I'm sure, we've got situations at many hospitals where the budgets are very tight. We've got people getting care in the hallway for days at a time for mental health issues, even close to ERs where the lights are always on, there's strangers going by at all times. It's just not a place to get better. I know that how the dollars would be spent would be a provincial thing and not a federal thing, but do you think higher numbers of dollars for federal healthcare transfers is the way for the federal government to help solve this problem, or can we go deeper than that?
So we know that the Harper government cut health transfer payments to the province, and the Liberal government maintained those cuts. And so that is one part of the issue that we're facing as part of our healthcare crisis. The NDP's plan is to implement a full universal pharmacare plan to cover everybody. That will save not only Canadians money, but will save businesses money, and will prevent downstream costs on our healthcare system. People are ending up in the hospital because they're not taking their medications. We will also implement a dental program. Once again, people are ending up in the hospitals because they're not able to maintain their teeth. They may get a secondary infection, which leads to them, taking up a $1,500 hospital bed. We know that we need to be investing more in prevention for the sake of Canadians' health, but also for our healthcare system. And so that's one of the ways that the NDP would address the overburden on our healthcare system that we're currently facing.
Thank you very much. Marianne Hodge of the Green Party now.
The Green Party has a holistic view to all policies, and it comes down to a very conservative idea of the triple bottom line, where things need to be evaluated according to the economy, the environment, and people. And we see this play out in healthcare as well, because one of the a big driver to increased healthcare costs is poverty. We know that it costs our healthcare system $76 billion a year in unavoidable healthcare costs because of poverty. So the Green Party is the only party that is here advocating for a guaranteed livable income, which would allow for people to have more dignity and to have a level of income where they are not making poor decisions. We would also support increasing the infrastructure funds that are available for mental health supports for things like the Indwell development that just opened in London.
Thank you very much. Kate Young of the Liberals.
One of the reasons I decided to get into politics 4 years ago was because of the healthcare issue, and I felt that the previous Conservative government had washed their hands of healthcare. They just gave a blank check to the provinces and said, do what you want with it. Well, we know what happened is the provinces weren't spending it on healthcare. They were finding other ways to spend the money. We now have put asterisks on the money that we transfer to provinces to make sure that they're spending money in 2 areas that are so important, and that's mental health and home care. because we know with the aging society, we need to make sure that people can age at home, and when they're sick can not go to the emergency rooms. And this is so important, but it is important that we have control as a federal government over our healthcare spending.
Okay, and Jacques Boudreau of the Libertarians.
The first thing that needs to be acknowledged is that we have a $900 billion unfunded liability in regards to healthcare. That is the excess over the costs that have been forecast, minus the value of the taxes that have been allocated to cover those. There's a gap, $900 billion that has not been addressed, will not be addressed by any other party. They don't want to touch this. Now, one of the things that the provinces are doing in order to address this is they're putting a cap on the supply. My son's an MD, and I know from him that governments call physicians occasionally to tell them to cease and desist for certain periods of time because there's no money to pay them. Now, these people are still available. We need to open this up so that they can practice on the private sphere in order to alleviate some of the waiting lists.
Michael McMullen of the People's Party of Canada.
London has always been known for its quality of health care, from the discovery of insulin and advances in HIV vaccines. London also employs about 25,000 plus healthcare professionals, and we are a hub when it comes to healthcare all over the province. We are a leader when it comes to healthcare, leading in research, development, and innovation. We at the People's Party of Canada would like that to continue, but recognize that changes need to be made to increase efficiency of the system to meet the needs of everyone. Having both private and universal health care will help reduce the burdens on our healthcare system. Patients will be guaranteed equal access regardless of income. Healthcare costs have been increasing at an unsustainable rate, putting more and more pressure on the budgets of the provincial governments. We must end the current confusion over who the federal government or provinces does, or who's responsible for the problem. Thank you.
Liz Snellgrove of the Conservatives.
Hallway medicine is a symptom of a much, much larger problem. It is, for example, the highest number of individuals who are in beds, who are seniors who can't go to a retirement home or a long-term care home because there's just not capacity in the system. Throwing more money at this problem is not going to solve it. It requires an entire paradigm shift of prevention. And as Canadians age, and in the year 2040, 25% of all Canadians will be seniors, no government has adequately planned for the healthcare costs, the personal care costs, or the home care costs. The federal government's role is not to dictate how the provinces spend that money. It is to uphold the Canada Health Act, of which home care, I will agree, is part.
Thank you very much. Our next question on healthcare will come from Sarah May Chitty, and the first to respond will be Marianne Hodge of the Green Party.
So we're kind of facing an unprecedented mental health and addictions crisis. You see it very visibly, particularly in this neighborhood. And we just talked about how the transfer of funding, provincial keeps saying there's not enough funding, cutting funding to these programs for mental health, though you did just mention that. But there are other solutions that the federal government can kind of propose to aid in helping people experiencing mental illness and addictions. And I was looking to see what your solutions might be.
As I was commenting in the previous question, the Green Party would support, would increase funds for infrastructure funds for creating more facilities like the facility that Indwell has just opened here in London, which houses about 70 adults with mental health challenges in a supportive environment. And this facility has taken 30 people out of Parkwood Hospital, and it costs, I was shocked, $600,000 a year to house someone in a psychiatric facility. because there weren't suitable places in the community, which is why the Green Party is about supporting municipalities, supporting organizations who will build these facilities in partnership with, in some cases, nonprofit organizations, in order to provide the supports that people need. When they come out of hospital, they need a supportive place in order to land.
Thank you very much. Kate Young of the Liberals.
I really believe we need to co-development a new healthcare system for our Indigenous people. We need to make sure that you are using the types of healthcare that you want for your community. And with young people and mental health issues, this is something that we can't stop and not do more about. We have to do more. The fact of the matter is that that we're seeing the suicide rates going up on reserves, and we are Canadians, and what we have done as far as colonization is to blame for so many of the issues. So we have to take, as a federal government, to take more of a lead and work along with the Indigenous community to make sure that your mental health services are on reserve and make sure that they're there for young people and for everyone, all Indigenous people.
Thank you very much. Jacques Boudreau of the Libertarian Party.
Well, the short of it is there's no magic answer to this. The unfunded liability problem that I mentioned is real. It's enormous. So if we're looking at funding, there's going to be, again, there's no magic solution. Now, I have a daughter who's also a psychiatrist, and I don't want to dispense medical advice, but and I don't mean to make, I mean, there's a wide array of mental illness, but she says, in broad terms, for a lot of people, they don't eat well, they don't exercise enough, and they don't sleep enough.
Okay, and Michael McMullen of the People's Party of Canada.
Yeah, mental health is a very broad and big issue full of many complexities. I have somebody in my family that suffers from this issue. What we intend to do at the People's Party of Canada is, I'm not going to come over here and tell you that I can give you all the answers today. But what we are going to do is we're going to do consultation with the actual professionals that know what's going on, the boots on the ground, and they're going to tell us what we need to do. I'm not going to sit here and promise everybody everything and tell you all the problems are going to go away. This is a big issue, and we need to work together, me and the healthcare professionals, to make sure that we can find a good solution that's good for everybody. Thank you.
Liz Snellgrove of the Conservatives.
When you ask those healthcare providers, especially primary care physicians, because they're really acting as case managers, in London, they'll tell you that there's a duplication of services or that there's a lack of services, and they're an incredible waiting list. I do agree with Jacques, surprisingly, with regard to the social determinants of health. Proper housing, proper nutrition, safety, compassion. It's not a magic bullet, but that's going to go a long, long way to preventing mental health and these issues.
Shauna Lukowitz of the NDP.
So every family is touched by mental health in some way, and just like our physical health, it ebbs and flows throughout our lives, and we need to address mental health in not exactly the same way that we address physical health, but we need to recognize that it's not a static state. For some people, it's a chronic issue, and for many of us, it's something that we face at different points in our lives. And so the social determinants of health are definitely an issue. We need to be looking at poverty. We need to be looking at housing. We need to be looking at education. Growing inequality is one of the reasons that we are seeing a mental health and addiction crisis, not only in our own community, but across the country. And if we want to seriously address the root causes of why this crisis is growing, then we need to be looking at all the pieces of the puzzle that are leading people to feel more desperate, suffering, depression, all the things that people are feeling given the social inequality that is growing and the uncertainty in affordability for just about everybody.
Thank you very much. And our last question on healthcare comes from Jennifer Beeman. And to start, we will have Kate Young of Liberals.
In 2000, the U.S. declared measles eliminated, and today, well, they're in danger of losing that status. Anti-vaccination rhetoric and sentiment is real, and it can have real consequences for population health. Now we've got public service announcements and education and outreach already. I want to know how your government will address this issue while respecting bodily autonomy and parental rights.
This is an issue that I'm sure 20 years ago none of us thought that we'd be talking about. It just seemed to be that everybody knew it was their responsibility to have their children vaccinated and to keep our vaccinations up to date. But it isn't now, and that is very concerning. And I think we do need to do more education. I know that we're doing enough, or some, but we're not doing enough because we keep hearing these stories of people who truly believe that it's not in their children's best interests to be vaccinated. And it is in all of our best interests to be vaccinated and to make sure that we keep up our vaccinations. But we do have to understand that people do get misinformation, and they take it one step too far. And I think it's important for us, even for schools, to make sure that there aren't children going to school that haven't had their vaccinations.
Thank you very much. We go to Jacques Boudreau now of the Libertarian Party.
Okay, so this is a typical personal rights against private property rights issue. Of course, everybody should have the right not to be vaccinated or not having their children vaccinated. It is their choice, it's not the state. However, schools or places of business should be, of course they're not because the government won't let them, but they should be allowed to set the rules that they want in terms of letting people on their own private property. So a school could easily say, you are welcome to come here, but we demand that you have this set of vaccination. And then the person is free to choose to go somewhere else if they don't want their children vaccinated and meet the requirements. And that could apply to a place of work as well.
Thank you very much. Michael McMullen of the People's Party of Canada.
Yeah, my position on this is very simple. If you choose to get vaccination, go ahead. If you choose not to, don't. It's your body. You should have the right to choose, and no government should tell you what you should or shouldn't put in your body. Thank you.
And Liz Snellgrove of the Conservatives.
It's a trade-off between individual rights and what's best for society. So a conservative government is supportive of evidence-based medicine, and the evidence is overwhelming that vaccines work and they prevent outbreaks of deadly diseases. And we are so fortunate in Canada to have an integral pharmaceutical system. In China right now, for example, their vaccines are not potent. And so we are very lucky, and that there is the duty of society to keep those protected.
Shauna Lukowitz of the NDP.
I'm going to come at this from a bit of a different angle, and I'm going to address foreign aid and the Conservatives, and I believe it's the PPCs, both cutting foreign aid. And this concerns me, given that much of the money goes to things like vaccinations. It goes towards maternal health. It goes to the prevention of airborne diseases. It's a humanitarian issue, and it is in our best interest as Canadians to ensure that we are providing funding so that other countries are vaccinating their peoples. We know we live in a global world, that global health impacts us all. And if we want to stop the resurgence of these diseases, then we need to be funding vaccinations. We need to be keeping people healthy. And as I said as well, it's really just a humanitarian issue. These are people's lives we're dealing with.
And we'll go to Michael McMullen of the PPC. He gave me the high sign first, so that he would like a 30-second rebuttal, and I'll come to you, Liz, afterwards.
Okay, well, When it comes to reducing foreign aid, it's not that I'm saying that Canada is not a caring and helpful country. We've been known all over the world for our ability to be generous, for our peacekeeping, for everything we've done. We've been known for this for the last, as far as since I was born. I was in the military, and I could go anywhere in the world, and people loved me. Right? So people aren't going to criticize us if we need to reduce some of this foreign aid. We're already at the top of our scale.
Thank you very much. And Liz Snellgrove of the Conservatives.
We do have to be a good global citizen, but we can't afford to continue to send millions and millions of dollars to dictatorships and corrupt governments. We have to prioritize. We can't keep continuing to send all this money abroad without evaluating what's the outcome and is it worth it?
Thank you very much. And now we'll go to Marianne Hodge of the Greens for her answer to this question from Jennifer Beeman.
I think I'd first like to weigh in on the international side that we are a global community these days, and what happens around the world has an impact on Canada. And we have committed through the United Nations to international support, and especially in the Sustainable Development Goals. And part of our commitment is we're actually falling short on our commitments for international aid. And we are affected by things that happen around the world. And we see that with global unrest happening, that there are many issues that factor into that. And part of our international aid dollars helps to alleviate some of that unrest. Here at home, we also, it is important to manage our disease here in Canada. And one issue that is staring us in the face is as our north melts and the permafrost thaws, we don't know what kind of disease we are going to be facing in the future.
Thank you very much, and we will end that there. That brings to an end our healthcare portion. We are moving on now to reconciliation, and we have two questions on this file. And the first will come from Sarah May Chitty, and the first to reply is, I believe, Jacques Boudreau. Yes, from the Libertarians.
Earlier this year, the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit report concluded there's a genocide of Indigenous peoples occurring in Canada. I was wondering if you could speak to each of your party's commitments to any of the calls for justice made in that report, and briefly outline any actions towards the decolonizing processes recommended in that report.
Well, I would have to repeat what I said before. The Indian Act would be repealed. We would give sovereignty to the bands to organize themselves. They would be able to look after their resources and negotiate with the government what type of arrangement they want to have. Freedom is the key here. It's not for the federal government to start. I mean, if we get the federal government involved, we're going to get more of the same. It has been an unmitigated disaster, and to expect that suddenly, because you just have a bunch of different people, that you're going to get a different outcome. Doing more of the same is going to give us more of the same results.
Thank you very much. Michael McMullen of the People's Party of Canada.
We know that many injustices has been committed by the present and the past Canadian governments towards Aboriginals. And like I said earlier, we can't rewrite the past, but we can do our best to, going forward, to fix the issues that were created by these two parties. Thank you very much.
Liz Snellgrove of the Conservative Party.
So it was under Stephen Harper's leadership in 2007 that the commission was launched, and a Conservative government will continue to work with Indigenous peoples to implement the recommendations that are in the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Commission report.
Thank you very much. Shauna Lukowitz of the NDP.
So the NDP is committed to implementing the calls to justice. As New Democrats, we commit to decolonization, recognizing the inherent rights of Indigenous peoples to govern themselves according to their own traditions, culture, languages, and more. And we also recognize the inherent strength and resiliency of Indigenous people. So we will work with Indigenous women, the families of missing and murdered Indigenous women, and communities to implement the inquiry's calls for justice. We will ensure that those who are fleeing violence have access to culturally appropriate transitional housing, emergency shelters, and supports. And we will continue to address the long-standing harms of generational trauma and colonization. And I would just like to challenge my colleague here, Ms. Snellgrove, on Stephen Harper bringing in the missing and murdered Indigenous women calls inquiry.
Okay, so we'll give Liz a 30-second rebuttal. Do you have enough information there I know that Shauna kind of got cut off by the bell.
It was in 2007, and it was under Stephen Harper's government that the commission was launched.
Okay. Marianne Hodge with Greens.
The Green Party is committed to true reconciliation, and one of the things that I have personally learned about this process in hearing Murray Sinclair speak last week is really about listening, and part of that is we have a number of reports that have been completed, and I challenge each one of you to actually read those reports. So this is something that Canadians have to internalize. It's not just for governments to do. It is things that we can take personally, and I have personally enacted that within my sphere of influence. And as I mentioned earlier, in our summer camp, we train all of our counselors in our First Nations Week on First Nations issues, and they come to it saying, yeah, we know, and they leave saying, man, we didn't realize what we didn't know. So education and listening and reading is the first step to true reconciliation.
Kate Young of Liberals.
Over the last 4 years, we have been building this relationship, and I know that the Prime Minister has said it's the most important relationship that we have, and I truly believe that. And we will continue to work to implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to actions and the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. And it is, as Marianne said, it is important for all Canadians to read the report, because you do, as you said, internalize it, and you do begin to understand what we have done to the Indigenous people. I do take exception with what Liz Snellgrove said about the Conservatives. Stephen Harper said just over 4 years ago that it was not a priority and that he was not going to move forward with the National Inquiry. We made it happen.
We'll go to Liz for a 30-second rebuttal.
Right, so I'd just like to reiterate, moving forward, that a Conservative government will honor and move forward with the recommendations contained in the report.
Okay, thanks very much. Our next question in the reconciliation portfolio is from Craig, and we will have Michael McMullen of the People's Party of Canada replying first.
As you're probably aware, there's a boil water advisory at Oneida Nation of the Thames right now. There are boil water advisories at First Nation communities all over this country, and if you go even further beyond that, you can see the horrifying situation at Grassy Narrows, where mercury poisoning has become a significant problem in their community. As opposed to thanking Grassy Narrows protesters for the donation, how would your party help with these problems?
Like I said earlier, we spend billions and billions and billions of dollars in foreign aid all over all this extra spending all over the world. We send it over to help them, but we can't even take the money to help our own people. So We're going to be clawing back this money, and we're going to fix this water problem once and for all. This has been going on for far too long. And with the money that we bring, it's also going to bring prosperity to the communities with infrastructure projects and buildings, and using Canadian resources to actually get this stuff built. We're going to just, first of all, we have to set the example. You can't tell everybody else how to live their lives when you don't even have your own house in order. So we need to get our house in order, and we need to get it in order now, and we will.
Thank you very much. Liz Snellgrove of the Conservatives.
A Conservative government will use funds for infrastructure to deal with this unacceptable level of boil water advisories throughout Canada. Kate alluded to the progress that the government had made over the last 4 years, but I don't think that that's necessarily progress. Taking down the boil water advisories, from 87 to 50 some odd. I believe that it's a priority, and that is a problem that should be solved by now. It also means, though, working in collaboration with communities, with Indigenous leaders, and not dictating to them policies that need to work. It's listening to them. What do they need?
Thank you very much. We'll go to Kate Young for 30 seconds as a rebuttal.
The previous Conservative government had 10 years to even start handling this problem, and they didn't. We started it, and we're going to finish it by 2021. All of the long-term drinking water advisories will be lifted.
Thank you. And now to Shauna Lukowitz of the NDP.
So Canada's relationship with Indigenous peoples, as we know, is deeply troubled, and it must change. And there's lots of talk about reconciliation. But before we move to reconciliation, we must address the fundamental rights that are lacking in many Indigenous communities, including the boil water advisories, but also the deplorable conditions of schools, as well as just the basic underfunding of services. And I'd like to point out that the boil water advisory for Oneida Nations of the Thames was not included in the Trudeau government's list of boil water advisories. It was excluded. So it's time we have a federal government who steps up to fund the services and fundamental needs of Indigenous communities in partnership. So the NDP makes a commitment to lift all boil water advisories by 2021, and we will also support Indigenous-led water management and operations and to put the control back there.
Thank you very much. We go to Marianne Hodge of the Green Party.
The Green Party believes that it is a human right to have clean drinking water, as well as a roof over your head and education. And we would absolutely move forward on infrastructure dollars to assist in moving forward with clean drinking water for all First Nations. But it's a bigger problem than that, as Shauna mentioned, and it's not just about clean water, but it's also about housing and food security. We've heard instances in the far north where tragedy has happened and their food supplies have been diminished, and it is something that we need to build more resilience, and it all stems back from our colonialist practices, that we cannot be imposing solutions on communities, but helping them to develop the solutions to these problems.
Thank you very much. And we'll go to Kate Young now of the Liberals.
It is very important for members of Parliament in the London region, even though the reserves are not in London West, to make sure that you have relationships with all of the chiefs at all of the communities in this vicinity. And that's what I've been doing. And certainly I have talked with the chief at Oneida about the water quality problem, and we have talked about increasing the amount of money that goes into infrastructure and making sure that they have what is needed to make sure that the water they're getting from the Thames River, and that's something that a lot of Londoners don't realize, realize is that they do get their water from the Thames River, and we must increase the amount of money that we're putting into the Greenway pollution plant so that the water is cleaner, and we have started and we're going to do more.
Thank you very much. Jacques Boudreau of the Libertarians.
I'm simply astonished by the knee-jerk reaction that we need the federal government to get involved. The federal government's had more than 100 years at this. And suddenly the people sitting on my right here, they think, boy, I got the solution because all the people who came before me, well, they didn't know what they were doing. That's utter nonsense. The issue here is the federal government itself is a failure. And we need to move beyond this. So I repeat, what we need is to provide the bands, the reserves, the freedom to act in their best interest. Enough of the old solution. If we do more of the same, we're going to get the same outcome.
Okay. That concludes the portfolio of questions on reconciliation, and I apologize, there is a fruit fly that is buzzing around my face and my microphone, so if I jerk around a little, that's because of our fruit fly friend. We're moving on to our final topic of the evening, which is human rights, and this comprises just one question, and it will come from Jennifer Beeman of the Free Press, and we will start with Shauna Lukowitz for our first answer.
20 years ago, same-sex marriage was a divisive issue in Canada. Even leading up to the legalization of it in 2005, opposing voices came from all sides, not just from any single party or faction alone, and that's certainly come out on the campaign trail. Divisions still exist, however, especially around the way trans rights are approached and the way trans people are treated in healthcare, in law, in other settings. What will you do to fix these fractures? What will you do to fix these fractures?
So the NDP has a long history of upholding human rights, including LGBTQ2+ rights, and it is something that myself, I have people in my very close family who are impacted by these issues, and we feel very strongly that there is a number of measures that still need to go further in terms. We've made great progress over many years, but there's still progress that needs to be made, and one area in particular is around the banning of conversion therapy for young people, and the NDP would bring that forward. We must also address the issue of giving blood for people within the LGBTQ+ community, and that's something that the NDP would address. So we know that human rights are not a static process, that we need to continue to fight, and that, that we still have much further to go, and that's what we're committed to do.
Thank you very much. Marianne Hodge of the Green Party.
The Green Party was the first to call for the legalization of same-sex marriage in the 1980s. And so we are very committed to rights for LGBTQ2+ individuals. We would repeal all federal laws and policies that are discriminatory on the grounds of sexuality, including Section 159 of the Criminal Code. We would establish funding programs within Health Canada to support community-based organizations offering targeted programs for youth, especially in mental health and well-being programs, including suicide prevention, peer support, coming out, and counseling. And we would fund community-driven education and awareness programs that lead to greater understanding of intersex realities and the diversity of sexualities and gender identities. And just as Shauna said, I'm sure that everyone here has a personal story, someone in their lives who deals with these issues, and it is important that we deal with them.
Thank you very much. Kate Young of the Liberals.
It is important to make sure that LGBTQ2 groups have funding so that they can do the good work that they need. And so we are investing $10 million a year over 3 years to help groups. We're also setting up support lines, and that is a $2 million a year commitment that will continue this work, and including support lines that provide sexual education. We're doing a ban on conversion therapy and also an end to the blood ban, because because this is the way we have to move forward. Human rights is something that all of us deal with, but I think the members of the LGBTQ2 community deal with every day, and they need our support, and the Liberal government will give them that.
Thank you very much. Jacques Boudreau of the Libertarian Party.
So I find it interesting that these parties are finally coming around to a viewpoint that's more libertarian. I don't know if you knew, but the recognition of marriage was strictly a religious one until the French Revolution, and then the state got involved. And I feel sorry to take the example of gay people who have had to fight forever to finally get the state to recognize that you could marry. It is none of the bloody state's business. But people in politics do this all the time. They think they know better, and they want to impose things on you or have laws that will prevent you from doing things. If there are no victims, it is none of the bloody state's business. End of story. You want to get married, you go ahead and get married. You want to do certain acts, you go ahead and do them. Again, as long as there's no victim, it is your business. It is none of the state. And it's about time that these parties come along to the ride.
Okay. Michael McMullen of the People's Party of Canada.
Trudeau uses identity politics like no other prime minister in the history of Canada, telling Canadians how they should live their lives, how they should feel, what they should think. This is not the Canada I grew up in. The current Liberal Party has become a boutique party of fake outrage and social engineering, dividing us while promoting a globalist agenda. The Charter of Human Rights Act of 1977 was put in place to protect Canadians from harassment and discrimination. It protects Canadians from discrimination against race, age, and sexual orientation. We believe that one law should apply to everybody. There shouldn't be separate laws for different people or different people with different sexes or anything like that. It should be the same law for everybody. We're not going to put everybody into little baskets and say that, this is who you are, because we know that no matter what your sexual orientation is, that you are an individual. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
A Conservative government will affirm the rights of LGBTQ two-spirit individuals. It's a humane thing to do. It's a compassionate thing to do. I personally do not believe in conversion therapy. It's barbaric. And as you said, we all deal with this in our personal circles and in our families. And so I'm proud to stand with the Conservative standpoint on this.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I think that brings to a close our final section, which means that we now have our closing statements from our candidates. Again, they will be in reverse order from how we began, which means we will begin with Jacques Boudreau of the Libertarian Party. Our candidates will stay seated for their closing statements, and I do believe they will be roughly a minute, right? Yes, perfect. Okay, so Jacques, when you are ready, go right ahead.
Okay, well, as we don't, 30 seconds, you said?
No, a minute.
Oh,
You've got oodles of time, a whole minute.
Well, I've mentioned before that we have a huge unfunded liability problem. The value of the promises made to Canadians in regards to CPP, OAS, GIS, and healthcare far exceeds the value of the future taxes that will be collected to pay for this. And that value is $2.7 trillion, right? So when the Liberal candidate here, gloats about the debt to GDP ratio and how good it is, it's a bunch of nonsense. These promises should actually be part of the balance sheet, and they're not. And it's not being addressed. They are not going to touch this. The Libertarian Party of Canada is the only party here tonight committed to tackling this problem head on to minimize the problems that we're facing. And again, there's no magic solution. Thank you.
Kate Young of the Liberals, your 1 minute closing statement.
Well, thank you very much. It has been a true honor to represent the people of London West for the past 4 years, and I hope to be able to continue the good work that we're doing as a Liberal government to move forward, because that's what we have to do. We have to look to the future and not go back to the ways of the previous Conservative government. That is not the way that we need to address the issues that are facing us today and into the future. We have so many complex issues to deal with, but we have to deal with them together. And I have always been one for positive politics and always trying to see the best in everyone. And I try my best, and I will continue to do that. And I hope that I will have that honor in the next 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Marianne Hodge of the Greens.
Thousands of scientists, economists, business leaders, and protesters are telling us that climate change is the issue of our generation. Many of the other parties have jumped on this bandwagon lately. What sets the Green Party apart is that we will not compromise. We will not declare a climate emergency and then buy a pipeline like the Liberals. We will not advocate for a fossil-free future and then support fracking and the LNG project like the NDP. We have a documented plan, unlike the Conservatives. There are many ideas that start with the Greens and other parties adopt, like decriminalizing marijuana possession, only they somehow get the implementation wrong. How do you take an idea like legalizing marijuana and lose money? Only a vote for the Green Party is a vote for real action on climate change that reaches the goals agreed to in the Paris Accord. A transition to a green future needs to ensure that no province is left behind. Canada is an energy nation. We must become a clean energy leader, but we can't do this if we continue to subsidize the fossil fuel industry. We need to move forward together.
Thank you so much, Marianne. Shauna Lukowitz of the NDP.
So more and more folks are struggling to afford the things they need. And for decades, Conservative and Liberal governments have been underfunding the programs and the services that people in Canada rely on. We are seeing the results of that in our own community. Disturbingly high healthcare wait times, housing crisis, an addiction crisis, and general unaffordability for many. We need to invest in the things that matter for Canadians and know that investing in our public system is good for people and it is good for our economy. If we want to have different results, we need to make different choices, and we need to elect people who have the conviction and the courage to stand up for things that matter. I am not afraid to speak when it is hard and advocate for what is needed. We need to elect a government who is on your side, who will make sure that London isn't left behind and that we create a community for every single one of us in Canada. That's who I am. You are who I'm fighting for, and I ask for your support on October 21st.
Liz Snellgrove of the Conservatives.
I've heard pundits say that this is a boring election campaign, or that there's not a clear ballot question. I disagree with that. On October 24th, Canadians have a choice, and it's a stark choice. When I knock on doors, I hear people who can't afford things. A Conservative government will put more money back in people's pockets. More importantly, though, let's look at integrity and credibility in leadership. We need to hold our elected officials accountable and make sure that they're representing us in Parliament and across this world in an ethical and a leadership way.
Thank you very much. Michael McMullen of the People's Party of Canada.
We at the People's Party of Canada are the only party that can have a robust debate, share ideas from a broad range of perspectives, and come to a consensus without the fear of retribution. Politicians should set the example on how to behave, and the People's Party of Canada will do politics differently, ending the polarization that has taken place within the Canadian political system. We will restore accountability to our government, balance the budget, and put more money towards healthcare, homelessness, and vets. Canada is now at a crossroads. Even our sovereignty and national identity are at risk. I look forward to working with the community to improve everyone's lives, to represent the people regardless of your political leanings. To the moms and dads who struggle to raise their children, to our grandmothers and grandfathers that built this country, and to our sons and daughters who need hope of a future. We at the People's Party of Canada will put Canadians first. It's time to focus on the needs of Canadians.
And
it's time.
Have to leave it there. Thank you so much. All right, that brings us to the end of the London West All Candidates debate, huh? To all of our candidates tonight, thank you so much for taking the time to be here, to share your views, for running for office. This is not easy to be out on the campaign trail or here on this stage. I defy anyone to get up here and think that it's easy afterwards. Thank you so much for your time and for your passion in sharing your views. Thank you to our media panel, Jennifer Beeman, Sarah Mae Chitty, and Craig Needles. Thank you to all of the staff at the Aeolian Hall, Andrew Rosser for helping to organize, volunteers from Rogers, and all of you, our lovely audience members. Thank you so much for being here tonight.